I was sitting in our company's plush corner office when Frank slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. His face turned crimson as he screamed those words I will never forget. "You are too stupid to run this company." After 10 years of pouring my heart and soul into our family business, I was being fired by my own stepfather. What Frank did not realize was that I had prepared for this betrayal. I had already secured what mattered most. Before I continue my story, where are you watching this from? Hit that like button if someone close has ever betrayed you, and subscribe to see how I turned this devastating moment into my greatest triumph. My name is Sammy Andrews, 32 years old, with an MBA from Northwestern. I have always been the careful type, the one who plans 3 steps ahead, and believes family comes first. My mother Elizabeth remarried Frank Donovan when I was 15. Together they built Apex Tech Solutions from our garage into a multi-million-dollar accounting software company. I still remember those early days helping them stuff envelopes for their first marketing campaign while doing my homework at the kitchen table. Mom would make her famous lasagna, and we would brainstorm ideas for new features. When I started college, I would come home every weekend to help with customer support calls. Those simple beginnings formed the foundation of what would become one of the most respected names in business software. After graduating with my MBA, I officially joined Apex Tech as a junior product manager. Within 5 years, I had worked my way up to Chief Innovation Officer. Our flagship product, Account Pro, dominated the market for small business accounting solutions. My contribution was developing the mobile platform that doubled our user base and increased revenue by 70% in just 18 months. Apex Tech grew to occupy 3 floors in a downtown high-rise, with over 100 employees. We expanded into international markets, and our annual revenue reached $20 million. Throughout this growth, Frank had been my mentor. He taught me about business strategies, how to negotiate with suppliers, and the importance of customer relationships. Sunday family dinners were my favorite time. We would sit around the table discussing new features for our software market trends and growth strategies. Mom would listen proudly as Frank and I debated the merits of different approaches. In those moments, I truly felt we were building something special together, something that would last for generations. That all began to change when Apex Tech hit the big time. Frank started attending industry conferences alone, even though I had previously joined him. He began excluding me from meetings with major investors. At first, I attributed these changes to his increased workload and stress, but looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs. 2 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The disease moved quickly, and within 6 months she was gone. Her death devastated our family and the company. Frank retreated into his grief, becoming distant and abrupt with everyone, including me. I stepped up to fill the leadership void, working 16-hour days to keep operations running smoothly, while Frank took time off. Just 8 months after my mother passed, Frank announced he was remarrying. Jessica Winters was 28 years old, 20 years his junior, and formerly a marketing consultant for one of our competitors. The news shocked everyone, especially considering how recent my mother's death had been. Still, I tried to be supportive. People grieve in different ways, and if Jessica made Frank happy, perhaps that would help him return to his old self. When he returned from his honeymoon, Frank seemed renewed, but not in the way I had hoped. He suddenly took an intense interest in daily operations, questioning decisions I had made during his absence. He began reviewing my work with unusual scrutiny, often changing my directions to the development team without consulting me first. During this time, I was leading our most important initiative, yet a project code named Nexus. It was a cloud-based, AI-driven financial management system that would revolutionize how small businesses handled their finances. This project was my vision, something I had conceptualized years earlier, and had finally convinced Frank to greenlight before my mother's illness. Nexus represented the future of Apex Tech, and I was determined to make it successful not only for the company but as a tribute to my mother's legacy. Little did I know that this project would become the center of the most painful betrayal of my life. The first sign of trouble came during a quarterly strategy meeting. I was presenting the progress on Nexus when Frank interrupted me mid-sentence. Instead of his usual constructive criticism, he dismissed my approach as amateur and short-sighted. The room fell silent as he proceeded to outline a completely different direction. One we had previously agreed was impractical due to technology limitations. Later that week, I received a company-wide email announcing that Tyler Winters, Jessica's 25-year-old son from a previous marriage, was joining Apex Tech as Deputy Operations Director, a position that had never existed before, effectively placed him between me and several departments I typically managed. When I requested a private meeting with Frank to discuss these changes, he kept rescheduling until finally agreeing to a brief 15 minutes between other appointments. During our conversation, he was dismissive, checking his phone repeatedly and sighing at my concerns. The situation worsened when I discovered my budget for Nexus had been slashed by 30% with no explanation. When I confronted Frank, he claimed it was necessary due to cash flow issues, yet the company had just leased a new corporate jet and renovated the executive floor. My access to certain financial reports was suddenly restricted. Meetings I had always attended were rescheduled to times when I was known to be unavailable. Loyal team members who had been with me for years were reassigned to other departments or let go with vague explanations about restructuring. I started documenting everything, keeping detailed notes of these incidents, saving emails and recording meetings when legally permissible. Something was not right, and I needed to protect myself and the project I believed in. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. I had stayed late to finalize some specifications for Nexus. Most of the office was empty, and I was walking to the break room for coffee when I heard voices coming from Frank's office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could clearly hear Frank speaking with Tyler. "As soon as I give Sammy the boot, the Nexus intellectual property rights will transfer to the parent company," Frank said. "We can bring in that team from Singapore to finish it at half the cost. Once we launch it, find a reason to let go of Sammy's development team. They are loyal to him, not the company." "But what if he fights back?" Tyler asked. "He did build most of it." "His employment contract is ironclad," Frank replied. "Everything he creates belongs to Apex Tech. Besides, he is too emotional about the company being his mother's legacy. He will not risk destroying it." I silently backed away, my heart pounding. The betrayal cut deep, but even worse was the calculated coldness with which Frank discussed disposing of me and my team people who had helped build Apex Tech from nothing. The next day, I noticed Frank having lunch with Marcus Jennings, the CEO of our biggest competitor, Horizon Software. They met at an upscale restaurant downtown, and though I could not hear their conversation, their body language suggested a deal was being made. This was unusual since Frank had always considered Marcus an enemy in the industry. Over the following weeks, more of my trusted colleagues were pushed out. Roger Stevens, our head of engineering who had been with us for 8 years, was replaced by someone from Jessica's former company. Maria Chen, our brilliant lead developer, was reassigned to maintenance of legacy products instead of Nexus development. The isolation was taking a toll on me. I began having trouble sleeping, waking at 3 a.m., with my mind racing, trying to figure out what was happening and why Frank had turned against me. The company that had once been my second home now felt hostile. Despite these challenges, I continued working on Nexus. If anything, the adversity fueled my determination to make it exceptional. I worked nights and weekends, often from home, to avoid the toxic office atmosphere. I invested my own savings in additional research and resources that the reduced budget could not cover. During a particularly tense product review, Frank humiliated me in front of the entire development team by dismissing 6 months of work as subpar and juvenile. Later, I overheard him telling Tyler that I was cracking under pressure just as he expected. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment staring at pictures of my mother and Frank from happier times, I realized I needed to prepare for the worst. The next morning, I called Jack Thompson, a lawyer who had worked with my mother on her personal affairs. I explained the situation and asked for his advice on my legal position within the company. What he told me was shocking. "Your mother apparently had concerns about Frank even before her diagnosis," Jack said. "She updated her will and created several legal instruments to protect your interests. She never had a chance to tell you due to how quickly her condition deteriorated." According to Jack, my mother had established a trust that included specific intellectual property protections for any innovations I developed at Apex Tech. While the company would have usage rights, the core patents would remain under my personal control through this trust. Frank, as executor of her estate, was legally obligated to inform me of these provisions but had never done so. With this knowledge, I began systematically securing my position. First, I created comprehensive backups of all Nexus code and documentation on private secure servers, not connected to Apex Tech systems. This was not theft, as Jack confirmed, but protection of assets that were rightfully mine, according to my mother's legal provisions. I discreetly registered patents for key components of Nexus through the trust my mother had established. The paperwork was complex, but Jack guided me through the process, ensuring everything was legally sound and properly documented. Next, I began researching the financial structure of Apex Tech. I discovered that after my mother's death, Frank had reorganized the company's debt structure in ways that benefited him personally, while creating significant tax and financial exposure for the business itself. He had taken out several large loans, using company assets as collateral, but the money had not been reinvested in the business. I also learned that Frank had been meeting with venture capitalists positioning Nexus as a standalone product that could be spun off into a separate company, conveniently excluding me from the ownership structure of this new entity. Armed with this information, I started building my contingency plan. I reached out to several key clients, with whom I had strong relationships ostensibly to gather feedback on their needs for future versions of our software. In reality, I was assessing which ones might follow me if I were forced to leave. I contacted Alex Rodriguez, my former college roommate who had become a successful venture capitalist. Without revealing too many details, I outlined a potential new business focused on next-generation financial software and gauged his interest in such a venture. Under a friend's name, I registered a new company called Innovate Tech Solutions. I secured modest office space in a building across town and set up the basic infrastructure needed to hit the ground running if necessary. I used my personal savings for this, ensuring there was no connection to Apex Tech resources. Most importantly, I began quietly reaching out to key team members who had been marginalized under Frank's new regime. Maria Chen, our brilliant developer who had been sidelined, agreed to join me if things fell apart at Apex Tech. So did Roger Stevens and 4 other top performers who had been pushed aside in favor of Tyler's friends. My preparation was methodical and careful. I documented everything meticulously, ensuring that my actions were ethically and legally defensible. I was not stealing from Apex Tech. I was protecting my mother's legacy and my own future from Frank's betrayal. Throughout this process, I maintained my outward commitment to Apex Tech and Nexus. I continued working long hours, attending all meetings, and presenting a positive face to the team. If Frank suspected what I was doing, he showed no sign of it. Instead, he became increasingly dismissive and critical, often in front of others. One afternoon, Tyler strutted into my office unannounced. I could not help but notice the expensive watch on his wrist and the smug expression on his face. Frank wants to see the latest Nexus prototype tomorrow, he said. He is bringing in some big investors. This was the first I had heard of any investor meeting. I have been working on it for months, I replied. It is not ready for an investment showcase yet. Tyler shrugged. Not my problem. Frank says it needs to be ready by 10 a.m. sharp. Oh, and he wants you to provide full documentation and access credentials. For the investors you know. I knew then that the endgame had arrived. The investors were likely part of Frank's plan to spin off Nexus without me. The request for full access credentials was transparent. Once they had complete access, they would not need me anymore. That night, I activated the final phase of my contingency plan. I called Jack and Alex, confirming that everything was in place legally and financially. Then I reached out to the team members who had agreed to join me, telling them to be ready but not making any specific requests yet. I wanted to give Frank one last chance to do the right thing. The next morning I arrived at the office early, with the Nexus demonstration prepared. I had created a version that showcased the impressive user interface and core functionality, while keeping the most innovative elements offline. It was a professional presentation that any legitimate investor would find compelling, without giving away the keys to the kingdom. At 10 a.m. sharp, I entered the main conference room. Frank was there with Tyler and Jessica, along with 3 men in expensive suits, whom I did not recognize. Notably absent were any of our regular investors or board members. Frank barely acknowledged my arrival. Without introducing me to the visitors, he launched into a presentation about Nexus as though it were his creation. He spoke about the development journey, the market potential, and the competitive advantages in ways that made it clear he was taking credit for my work. When it was time for the demonstration, I connected my laptop to the projector and began showing the system. One of the visitors, who introduced himself as Ronald Blackwell from Horizon Ventures, seemed particularly interested in the technical details, asking questions that suggested he was more of a technical evaluator than an investor. As I was explaining a key feature, Frank interrupted. "This is all taking too long," he said impatiently. "Just give Mr. Blackwell the access code so his team can evaluate the back-end directly." I hesitated. "That is not standard procedure for an initial investment meeting," I said carefully. "Perhaps we could schedule a more technical review after the appropriate NDAs are in place." Frank's face flushed with anger. "Mr. Blackwell is not just any investor," he snapped. "He represents a potential acquisition partner. Now give him what he needs." In that moment, everything became clear. This was not an investment meeting. It was an acquisition negotiation, likely with our competitor. and Frank was selling Nexus out from under me. The realization must have shown on my face, because Frank's expression hardened. "I think we need to discuss this privately first," I said, standing up. "Sit down," Frank ordered. "You work for me, and you will do as I say." I remained standing. Actually, according to my mother's trust agreements, Nexus is protected intellectual property. Any acquisition would require my approval as the primary inventor. The room went silent. Frank stared at me in shock, then fury. "You think you are so clever?" he finally said, his voice dangerously quiet, "always hiding behind your mother's skirts." He turned to the visitors. "Gentlemen, would you excuse us? We seem to have an internal matter to resolve." After they left, Frank exploded. "How dare you undermine me in front of potential partners, you ungrateful little parasite? I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." "You gave me nothing," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "My mother and I built this company alongside you. Nexus is my creation, developed under legal protections she put in place because she did not fully trust you." It seems she was right. Frank's face contorted with rage. "You are fired," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You are too stupid to run this company. You always have been. I only kept you around because of your mother, but that obligation died with her." Tyler smirked from behind Frank. Jessica looked uncomfortable but said nothing. "You cannot fire me," I said calmly. "I own 30% of Apex Tech through my mother's estate." "Not anymore," Frank snarled. "Those shares were transferred to the corporate treasury as part of the restructuring. Your signature is on the paperwork." I had never signed such documents, but before I could say so, security guards entered the room. Frank must have called them while I was doing the demonstration. "Escort Mr. Andrews from the building," Frank ordered. "His access is terminated effective immediately. He can collect his personal belongings under supervision." As the guards approached, I looked Frank directly in the eyes. "You will regret this," I said quietly. His mocking laugh followed me out the door. The same door my mother and I had walked through proudly so many times before. That night alone in my apartment, I felt a storm of emotions. Betrayal, rage, grief all swirled within me. I found myself looking at old photos of my mother, wondering what she would advise me to do now. The answer came clearly. She would tell me to protect what we had built. Not out of vengeance, but because it mattered. The next morning, I officially launched Innovate Tech Solutions with a press release announcing Nexus Pro, a next-generation financial management system. Within hours, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from industry analysts, potential customers, and even some Apex Tech employees wondering what was happening. By midday, Jack called to inform me that Frank's lawyers had sent a cease and desist letter claiming I had stolen proprietary technology. We had anticipated this, and were fully prepared with documentation of my ownership rights through my mother's trust. I reached out personally to Apex Tech's top 20 clients, many of whom I had built relationships with over years. I explained that I had started a new venture, continuing the innovative work I had been known for. Without disparaging Apex Tech, I invited them to preview our new offering. 15 of them agreed to meetings within the first week. 12 signed letters of intent after seeing Nexus Pro demonstrations. Meanwhile, Frank was discovering the full extent of my preparations. The version of Nexus left at Apex Tech was functional, but missing key components that I had legally protected through my mother's trust. The documentation was professional but lacked the crucial insights needed to develop the system further without me. The team members who had agreed to join me submitted their resignations simultaneously, creating a sudden expertise vacuum at Apex Tech. Frank attempted to stop them with threats of legal action, but their contracts did not include the same restrictive clauses as mine. 3 weeks after my firing, Jack delivered the final blow. He filed legal documents revealing that Frank had failed to execute key provisions of my mother's will, including the formal transfer of intellectual property rights to me. Furthermore, the loans Frank had taken against company assets without proper board approval constituted potential fraud. The effect was immediate and devastating for Frank. The acquisition talks collapsed when Horizon Ventures learned about the intellectual property disputes. Several board members previously unaware of Frank's financial maneuvers called for an emergency meeting and audit. Apex Tech's stock price dropped 40% in 2 days, as news of the management chaos spread through the industry. Clients began canceling contracts, unwilling to risk their financial data with a company in turmoil. I took no pleasure in watching the company my mother had helped build struggle, but Frank had left me no choice. He had attempted to steal my work and erase my contribution to our family legacy. 6 months later, Apex Tech filed for bankruptcy protection. Frank was forced to resign amid multiple investigations into financial improprieties. The beautiful offices were sold to cover debts, and the company name was acquired by a competitor for pennies on the dollar. Meanwhile, Innovate Tech thrived. We secured venture funding at a valuation 3 times what Apex Tech had been worth. We hired many former Apex Tech employees who had lost their jobs in the collapse, providing them with better compensation and a more inclusive culture. Nexus Pro received industry awards for innovation and user experience. Business magazines featured me in their 30 under 40 lists, and our client base grew exponentially. 1 year after my firing, I was having coffee at my usual cafe when a familiar figure walked in. Frank looked much older now, his confident swagger replaced by a hesitant shuffle. He did not notice me at first, ordering the cheapest item on the menu and counting out exact change from a worn wallet. When he turned and saw me, he froze. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. Then, surprisingly, he approached my table. "May I sit?" he asked, his voice lacking the commanding tone I remembered. I nodded, curious about what he might say. "I suppose you are enjoying this," he said, gesturing vaguely at himself. Seeing me brought low. "No," I replied honestly. "I never wanted this outcome. I just wanted to protect what my mother and I built." He was quiet for a moment. "She was always the heart of the company," he finally said. "After she died, I lost my way. Jessica left, you know. As soon as the money was gone." I was not surprised, but offered no comment. "Tyler too," Frank continued bitterly. "Turns out he was just using me to get connections in the industry. He works for Horizon now." I sipped my coffee, letting him talk. "I was wrong," Frank said abruptly. "About you. About everything." It was as close to an apology as I would ever get from him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. "What is this?" he asked, suspiciously. "Do you remember the $1,000 you gave me when I got accepted to Northwestern?" I said. "You told me it was an investment in my future. This is that money with interest." Frank stared at the envelope, then back at me. "Why would you give me anything?" "Because holding on to anger and resentment only poisons you from within," I said. "My mother taught me that. The money is yours, no strings attached." As I stood to leave, Frank caught my sleeve. "I am sorry, Sammy. For everything." I nodded. "I know. Take care of yourself, Frank." Walking away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The betrayal had taught me painful but necessary lessons about business, family, and myself. I had learned that true success comes not from revenge, but from building something worthwhile with integrity and purpose. Today, Innovate Tech employs over 200 people, many of whom have been with me since the beginning. We have expanded into new markets and technologies, always guided by the principles my mother valued: innovation, integrity, and treating people with respect. The corner office in our new headquarters has a small photo on the desk. It shows my mother in front of our first garage office, smiling proudly at the camera. Every morning I look at that photo and remember that the most valuable legacy is not the company or the products, but how we treat people along the way. What would you have done in my situation? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that betrayal does not define you. Your response to it does. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the worst moments in your life lead to the best ones if you have the courage to rebuild.